I overheard my husband on the phone laughing. "She trusts me completely, the fool." I stayed quiet and kept smiling. The next morning, at breakfast, I handed him an envelope and said, "Open it." His face went white. His hands started shaking, and he whispered, "How did you—" What was inside changed everything. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The ice in my tea crackled, the sound absurdly loud in the sudden silence of the kitchen. My hand, halfway to bringing the glass to my lips, went perfectly still. Through the slight gap in the patio doors, his voice carried on the afternoon breeze, warm and amused. "Oh, don't worry about that," he was saying, the familiar chuckle I'd loved for 3 decades now curdling in my ears. "She trusts me completely, the fool." The world did not tilt. The sun did not stop shining on my rose bushes. But something inside me, something foundational and old, solidified into a block of cold, clear glass. I set the glass down on the countertop without a sound. The condensation made a damp ring on the granite. I watched it spread. I heard the low murmur of a voice on the other end of his phone, a feminine lilt I did not recognize. His answering laugh was intimate, conspiratorial. I know, right? 30 years. She never questions a thing. It's almost too easy. 30 years. The number hung in the air, a monument I had helped build, now revealed to be made of papier-mâché. I stood there, in the heart of the home we had made, and listened to my husband dismantle it with a few careless sentences. The smell of the roses I had pruned that morning, rich and sweet, clashed with a sudden metallic taste in my mouth. I swallowed it down. I moved then, not toward the door to confront him, but away, to the sink. I turned on the tap and rinsed my hands, watching the water flow over my fingers. I methodically dried them on a towel. My movements were automatic, precise. The screaming in my head was a distant thing, locked behind that wall of glass. The primary emotion was not grief, not yet. It was a profound, chilling clarity. When the patio door slid open, I was at the refrigerator pulling out ingredients for dinner. The chill from the appliance felt appropriate. "Hey, Evie," Robert said, his voice still carrying the ghost of his laughter. He came up behind me, smelling of sunshine and faint cologne, and planted a casual kiss on my shoulder. "What's for dinner? Something smells good already." I did not flinch. I closed the refrigerator door and turned, a smile finding its way to my face. It felt like a physical act, like lifting a weight. "I was thinking of that lemon herb chicken you like," I said. My voice was normal. It came out steady, almost cheerful. "With the roasted potatoes." His face lit up with that charming, effortless smile. "You read my mind. Long day at the office. That sounds perfect." He peered at me, his eyes crinkling. "You okay? You look a little pale." The audacity of the question, the concern in his tone, was almost impressive. I felt a flicker behind the glass, hot and sharp. I channeled it into the act of selecting a knife from the block. "Just a little headache coming on," I said, turning to the chopping board. "The sun was strong in the garden earlier. I'll take something in a bit." "You work too hard out there," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. He leaned against the counter, watching me, the picture of marital contentment. "Those roses are your babies." "They require care," I said simply, slicing into a lemon. The citrus scent burst into the air, clean and astringent. Neglect them, and they develop root rot. It can look healthy on the surface for a while, but underneath, it's already dead. He hummed, not really listening, already scrolling through his phone. I finished preparing the chicken, my hands working on muscle memory. My mind was elsewhere. It was cataloging, the time, 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, the exact wording, "She trusts me completely, the fool." The tone, affectionate derision. The context, a private phone call outside, assuming I couldn't hear. The corroborating data point, the unknown feminine voice. The subject, the entirety of our marriage, summarized as a mark of my stupidity, A fool trusts without verification. A fool accepts surface appearances. A fool hears a laugh and thinks it signifies joy, not contempt. I had been a financial auditor for 35 years before I retired. My profession was built on a simple, unglamorous principle: trust but verify. I had applied it to ledgers, to expense reports, to the financial statements of corporations. I had, somehow, failed to apply it to my own life. I had taken the single largest emotional investment of my existence entirely on faith. As Robert went upstairs to shower, whistling, I put the chicken in the oven and set the timer. Then I walked to the small, tidy study we shared. From the top shelf of the closet, behind a row of old tax documents, I retrieved a simple leather-bound journal. It was empty. I had bought it years ago for a project I never started. I sat at the desk, the late afternoon sun painting a warm rectangle on the wood. I opened the journal to the first page. At the top, I wrote the date. Then, in my precise looping cursive, the script I used for official reports, I began. Entry 1, 4:17 p.m., overheard from kitchen. Subject R on patio phone call. Direct quotation, "She trusts me completely, the fool." Addressed to unidentified female. Tone was mocking. Affectionate derision. Follow-up quotation, 30 years. "She never questions a thing, it's almost too easy." I paused, the pen hovering. The clinical language created a safe distance. It transformed the raw, gasping wound into a data point, an anomaly in the ledger of my marriage. I continued, outlining the immediate facts as I knew them: our joint accounts, the house, the cars, the investments. I made a list, not of assets, but of vulnerabilities. Where was my trust most physically manifested? Where had I been a fool? The timer for the oven went off. I closed the journal, returned it to its hiding place, and went back to the kitchen. The room was filled with the comforting smell of roasting chicken and herbs. I prepared the rest of the meal mechanically. When Robert came down, his hair damp, dressed in casual clothes, I had the table set. We sat across from each other as we had for 10,000 nights. He talked about his day, a tedious story about a client meeting. I nodded, made small sounds of acknowledgement, asked prompting questions. I watched him. I saw the easy smile, the relaxed posture, the way he gestured with his fork. I saw the man I loved, and for the first time, I saw the performance. I saw the confidence of someone who believed his audience was enraptured, unsuspecting. "This is fantastic, Evie," he said, taking another bite. "You always know just what I need." "I'm glad you like it," I said, and took a sip of my water. The glass was cool in my hand. That night, lying beside him in the dark, listening to his steady breathing deepen into sleep, I stared at the ceiling. The cold glass inside me had grown, encasing the hurt, the humiliation, the searing sense of loss. They were there, but they were contained. On the other side of that glass, a new space was opening up. It was quiet and dark and empty, a planning room. The fool had heard the truth. The fool had noted it down. The fool now was no longer trusting. The fool was verifying. And I knew, with a certainty that was the first solid thing I had felt since the ice cracked in my glass, that Robert Carson had no idea what was coming. He had mistaken my trust for simplicity. He had mistaken my love for blindness. He would soon learn the cost of that error. The audit had begun. The audit began that night. The quiet, methodical part of my mind, the part that had reviewed countless ledgers for discrepancies, took full command. The emotional noise was relegated to a closed file, something to be examined later, if at all. My first task was to establish a baseline of truth. Robert left for work the next morning with another kiss on my cheek, his briefcase in hand, every inch the respectable husband. I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the tree-lined street. Then I went to the study. Our home phone bill was accessible online through a joint email account. The password was something simple, a pet's name from decades ago. I logged in. I navigated to the detailed call logs for his mobile number, which was still on our family plan. The list of calls and texts from the previous month populated the screen. I sorted by frequency. His number 1 contact was, predictably, my own mobile. Number 2 was his office line. Number 3 was a number with a local area code I did not recognize. I counted. In 30 days, there had been 47 calls to or from that number. The duration of the calls varied, but many were lengthy, some extending past an hour. The timestamps showed calls during his lunch breaks, in the early evenings when he claimed to be working late, and on 2 occasions, very late at night, when he had supposedly gone out to the garage to tinker with his tools. I wrote the number down in the journal. I noted the pattern, the frequency, the timing. It was a data point, not yet proof, but a significant anomaly. Next, I turned to the shared computer in the study. Robert used it for browsing and occasional work he brought home. I had a separate laptop for my own use. I knew he was not technically sophisticated. He used the same 2 passwords for everything. I accessed his user profile. His email was open in the browser. I did not read it then. Instead, I inserted a small USB drive I had purchased years ago for data backup. On it was a simple keylogger program. It was a tool I had read about during my career, a way to monitor activity for security purposes. I installed it quietly. It would record every keystroke made on that computer, capturing passwords, emails, search terms. The installation took less than a minute. I removed the USB drive and placed it in the pocket of my robe. The financials would be more time-consuming. That evening, after another carefully performed dinner, I waited until Robert was engrossed in a television program. I told him I had some gardening notes to organize and retreated to the dining room. I spread the statements from our joint accounts across the polished table. The soft glow of the overhead lamp created a pool of light in the otherwise dark house. I worked with a pen, a notepad, and a calculator. I reviewed the checking account, the savings, the investment portfolio I had largely managed. At first glance, everything appeared normal: mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery purchases. But my eye, trained to spot inconsistencies, settled on a series of line items from our joint checking account. They were listed as vendor transfer with a vague reference number. The amounts were not large: $200, $350, $150. They occurred every 2 weeks like clockwork for the past 8 months. The destination was a bank account number I did not recognize. The memos were blank. The total was just under $5,000, a manageable, forgettable sum siphoned off over time. It was the pattern that was telling. It was systematic. It was hidden. I felt a cold ripple behind the glass wall. This was no impulsive affair. This was a planned, ongoing diversion of resources. My resources. Our household's resources. I thought of the laughter in his voice. It's almost too easy. I needed a confidant. I needed someone who could be an objective sounding board and, if necessary, an operative. There was only one person. The next morning, after Robert left, I called Gloria. "Can you meet for coffee?" I asked, my voice even. "At that little place by the park, in an hour." There was a pause on the line. Gloria and I had been friends since our 20s. She could hear the weather in my voice. "Everything all right, Evie?" "No," I said plainly, "but I will be. I need your eyes and your discretion." "I'll be there," she said, no further questions asked. At the cafe, we took a table in the corner. The morning sun streamed through the window. I stirred my black coffee and, without preamble, told her what I had overheard. I showed her the journal entry. I told her about the phone number and the financial transfers. I did not cry. My presentation was clinical. Gloria listened, her face hardening from concern to a sharp, focused anger. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she placed her hand firmly over mine on the table. "That stupid, arrogant man," she said, her voice low and fierce. "What do you need me to do?" "I need to know who that phone number belongs to," I said. "I could call it, but that would alert them. I need you to call it from a blocked number. Pretend to be a wrong number or a survey. Get a name if you can. Just a voice, a confirmation." Gloria nodded. a glint in her eye. This was a puzzle, and she was a retired teacher who loved solutions. Consider it done. What else? For now, just that, and your silence. Absolute silence. You have it, she said. She squeezed my hand. He has no idea who he's dealing with, does he? He thinks he does, I said. That's his fundamental error. 2 days later, Gloria came over under the guise of helping me plan a small garden party. We sat in the living room. Robert was playing golf. She handed me a slip of paper. On it, she had written, Penelope. Sounds young. Annoyed by wrong number. Penelope. The name meant nothing to me. I filed it away. That night, I sat again at the dining table. In the journal, under the first entry, I created a new section. I wrote, Anomaly 1. Frequent contact with unidentified number. Source. Phone records. Identified as Penelope. Anomaly 2. Regular small sum transfers to unknown account number XXXX. Source. Joint checking statements. Pattern indicates deliberate, ongoing diversion. I stared at the words. The emotional pain was a distant thrum, a background static. The foreground was now occupied by facts, by evidence, by strategy. The shift was complete. I was no longer a wounded wife. I was an auditor conducting a forensic examination of a failed partnership. The objective was no longer reconciliation. The objective was to ascertain the full scope of the damage and to secure all remaining assets. The house was silent around me. Upstairs, Robert slept, secure in his deception. Downstairs, I worked in the calm light, building my case, one verified fact at a time. The trail was clear. I would follow it to its end. The name Penelope was a piece of data, but data requires context to become intelligence. I needed a face, a position, a history. The next morning, with Robert at work, I sat at my own laptop in the living room. I opened a browser and navigated to the website of his marketing firm. The Our Team page was a grid of smiling headshots. I scanned the names. There she was, near the bottom of the list, Penelope Walsh, account coordinator. The photograph showed a woman in her early 30s, blonde hair styled smoothly, a bright, practiced smile. She was pretty in a conventional way. I felt nothing looking at her picture. She was a variable in an equation, not a person. I wrote her full name and title in the journal. Then I opened a social media platform. I did not have an account, but many profiles were public. I typed her name into the search bar. Several profiles appeared. I selected the one that matched her location and employer. Her profile was not private. I began to scroll. Her life unfolded in a series of curated images. There were pictures from expensive restaurants, rooftop bars with city views, weekend trips to boutique hotels by the coast. She was often posing with girlfriends, holding colorful cocktails. In several photos, she wore recognizable designer items, a handbag, a pair of sunglasses. The captions were filled with hashtags about luxury, blessings, and living her best life. An account coordinator at Robert's firm would earn, at most, a modest salary. The lifestyle she displayed was far beyond that. I cross-referenced the dates on some of the posts. A weekend at a vineyard 2 months ago coincided with a sales conference Robert had attended out of town. A dinner at a notoriously expensive steakhouse was posted the same evening Robert had told me he was working late, forgetting his phone charger. I did not feel a surge of jealousy. Instead, I felt a cold, analytical disdain. It was so obvious, so trite. A middle-aged man and a younger colleague, financed by pilfered household funds. The classic cliché of it was almost insulting. He had risked our 30-year life, my trust, for something so utterly banal. I took screenshots of the most relevant posts, saving them to a secure folder on my laptop. I noted the dates and Robert's corresponding alibis in my journal. The financial transfers now had a visual context. The money was buying dinners, hotel rooms, a sense of affluence for Penelope Walsh. When Gloria came over that afternoon, I showed her the social media profile on my screen. Gloria leaned in, her lips pressed into a thin line. An account coordinator. she said, her voice flat. She's dressing well above her pay grade. She is, I agreed, and the timing of these outings is suggestive, but it's still circumstantial. We have phone records and transfers to an unknown account. We have social media posts. We need a direct visual link. Gloria understood immediately. You want me to follow them? If you're comfortable, it would be the most direct confirmation. A lunch meeting, perhaps. Something public. I knew I was asking a lot. Gloria was my friend, not a private investigator. She didn't hesitate. Give me a schedule for the week. I'll make myself available. It'll be like a field trip. There was a determined gleam in her eye. The injustice had ignited a sense of purpose in her. 2 days later, Robert mentioned offhandedly over breakfast that he had a client lunch downtown at 1 o'clock. I nodded, wishing him a productive meeting. After he left, I texted Gloria the name of his firm's building and the time. She replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. The hours passed slowly. I occupied myself with gardening, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. My mind was not in the flower beds. It was on a city street, watching doorways. At 3:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Gloria. Cafe Bianco, 12:55 to 2:20. Got video. Coming over. When she arrived, her face was flushed, but with excitement, not exertion. She came into the study and handed me her tablet without a word. She had opened a video file. I sat at a table near the entrance, she said quietly. I ordered a coffee and kept my phone propped up in my menu. It's not Hollywood quality, but it's clear. I pressed play. The video was shaky at first, then stabilized, focusing on the entrance of a chic cafe. The timestamp in the corner read 12:58. A moment later, Robert walked into the frame. He was smiling, holding the door open for someone. Penelope Walsh stepped through. She was dressed in a sleek, professional dress, her hair perfect. She looked up at him and laughed at something he said. He placed a guiding hand on the small of her back as they were shown to a table. The gesture was proprietary, intimate, not collegial. The video zoomed in slightly as they sat across from each other in a booth. They leaned forward, their conversation intense, private. At one point, she reached across the table and touched his hand. He turned his palm up to hold hers for a brief second before letting go. The video lasted for 90 seconds. Gloria had stopped recording when it became clear they were settled in for a long lunch. I watched it once. Then I watched it a second time. I observed their body language, the ease between them, the simple fact of their presence together at a discreet location during a workday. The cold glass wall inside me held firm. I felt a distant pang, like an old surgery scar being pressed, but it was muted. More pronounced was a sharp, clarifying sense of validation. The hypothesis was confirmed. The data was now conclusive. "Well," I said, my voice sounding calm and far away, "there it is." Gloria watched me, concern in her eyes. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said, and realized it was true in that moment. The shock was gone. The wound was mapped. I needed to see it. Now I know. I ejected the tablet's memory card and handed the device back to her. "Thank you, Gloria. This was critical." "What now?" she asked. "Now," I said, turning back to my journal, "I move from verification to asset protection. The emotional case is closed. The financial and legal case is just beginning. I wrote a new entry, direct observation. Subject R&PW at Cafe Bianco, date, time. Physical contact observed. Confirms personal relationship. Corroborates phone and financial data." The other woman had a face, a name, and a taste for funded luxury. She was no longer a mystery. She was simply another component of Robert's deception, a symptom of the larger disease. My focus narrowed past her, past the hurt, onto the structures that had enabled this. The legal framework of our marriage, the financial ties, the house we lived in. Penelope was his problem now. Securing what was mine was mine. With the identity of the other woman confirmed, my attention turned to the most tangible asset, the house. It was more than a building. It was the physical container of my life, of my history. My mother's rocking chair sat in the corner of the living room. The kitchen tiles were the ones I had chosen. The garden was my creation. The thought of Robert having any claim to it was intolerable. I remembered, with the sharp clarity that comes under pressure, a decision I had made over 20 years ago. When my mother passed, she left me this house, free and clear. It was a modest, well-built home in a neighborhood that had since become desirable. When Robert and I moved in, there was talk of putting his name on the deed. It was the practical thing to do, he had said, a sign of our shared commitment. But my professional instincts had twitched. I had just finished auditing a company torn apart by a messy partnership dissolution. The memory of those entangled assets, the legal morass, was fresh. I had told Robert it was unnecessary, that we were married, and that provided plenty of legal entanglement. Secretly, I had wanted to keep this one piece of my heritage separate, a quiet personal safety net I never thought I would need. He had grumbled but acquiesced, distracted by other matters. I had handled all the paperwork myself through a small, reputable firm. I needed to know if that decision, made by a younger, more cautious version of myself, had held. I looked up the name of the lawyer who had handled my mother's estate, Higgins and Associates. A quick search confirmed the firm still existed, now run by the original lawyer's daughter, a Ms. Abigail Higgins. I called and made an appointment for the following afternoon, citing a review of estate documents. I did not mention divorce. Not yet. The law office was in a quiet, older building downtown. The air inside was cool and carried the faint scent of paper and lemon polish. The receptionist led me to a modest office where Miss Higgins sat behind a large, orderly desk. She was a woman in her 70s, with sharp eyes behind practical glasses and a no-nonsense gray bob. She looked up as I entered and gave me a small, polite smile. "Mrs. Carson," she said, rising slightly to shake my hand. Her grip was firm. "Please, have a seat. You mentioned reviewing your mother's estate documents?" "Yes," I said, settling into the leather chair opposite her. I placed my hands flat on my knees to keep them still. "Specifically, the deed and title for the property on Willow Lane. I need to understand the current status of ownership. Is it still solely in my name?" Ms. Higgins nodded, turning to a filing cabinet behind her. She pulled out a slim folder with practiced ease. "We handled the transfer of title upon your mother's passing. Let me pull up the current county records to confirm there have been no changes." Her fingers flew over her keyboard. The silence in the room was broken only by the efficient click of keys and the hum of the computer. I waited. I studied a framed diploma on the wall. The clock ticked softly. After a few minutes, she turned her monitor slightly so I could see it, though the legal text was small. She pointed with a pen. "Here is the grant deed, recorded on the date of transfer. It lists you, Evelyn Marie Carson, as the sole grantee. And here," she clicked, bringing up another screen, "is the current tax assessor's information. The property is listed under your name only. There is no other name on the title, no lien from a joint loan. Nothing." She looked at me over her glasses. "The house is unequivocally yours, Mrs. Carson. Is there a reason for the concern?" The relief that washed through me was not warm. It was a cold, solid wave, like a slab of granite settling into place. It was the first piece of unassailable ground I had stood on since hearing his laugh on the patio. "There may be a reason," I said, my voice steady. "My husband may be under the impression he has some ownership interest. We have lived there together for over 20 years. Miss Higgins' expression did not change, but her eyes grew keener. "Community property laws can be complex, but they generally apply to assets acquired during the marriage. This was an inheritance, brought into the marriage and kept separate. Unless you actively refinanced together or added his name to the deed, which according to this, you did not. He has no legal claim to the property itself. He may have a claim to some portion of the increased equity accrued during the marriage, but that is a separate and more nuanced matter." She leaned forward slightly. "Is this a prelude to a marital dissolution?" "It is," I said, meeting her gaze. "And I need to understand my position before any proceedings begin. I want to ensure he cannot lay claim to my home." A faint approving look crossed her features. "A prudent approach. Based on this, your position is very strong. The house is your separate property. The fact that you maintained that separation, whether by instinct or design, is to your significant advantage." She closed the folder. "Should you decide to proceed, I would be happy to represent you. I have little patience for spouses who believe history and shared residence trump clear legal title. I felt the first real surge of power, clean and sharp. It was not emotional, it was factual. The house was mine. He had lived in it, enjoyed it, but he did not own it. He had no claim to the walls that had heard his betrayal. "Thank you, Ms. Higgins," I said. "I am gathering documentation. When I am ready to move forward, I will contact you. For now, I would appreciate your discretion." "Of course," she said. "My client conversations are always confidential. You take the time you need." She handed me a business card and a copy of the deed from her printer. The paper was warm, the ink sharp. I walked out of the cool office into the afternoon sun. The weight of the folder in my hand was negligible, but its significance was immense. I got into my car and sat for a moment, looking at the crisp lines of the legal document. The rustle of the paper was a dry, decisive sound. I drove home not to a shared asset, but to my property. Every tree I passed, every familiar street sign felt different. The landscape had not changed, but my understanding of my place within it had solidified. He was a guest in my life, a guest who had long overstayed his welcome. That evening, I filed the copy of the deed in my fireproof lockbox, alongside the journal and the memory card from Gloria. The lock clicked with a satisfying finality. The foundation of my plan was no longer an idea. It was a piece of paper, signed, recorded, and unassailable. The house she built was mine. And soon, he would be learning that lesson the hard way. With the deed secure in my lockbox, the next phase was clear. I had to disentangle the financial veins that connected us. Money was the practical lifeblood of our shared existence, and I needed to stop its flow to him, quietly and completely. My career had been built on tracing such flows, and now I would redirect them. The following Monday morning, after Robert left for work, I dressed in a simple but presentable suit. I gathered my identification, social security card, and a recent utility bill in my name. I drove to a different branch of our bank, one across town where we did not typically go. I needed to establish a new, private beachhead. The bank was quiet at that hour. A young teller named Sophia greeted me with a professional smile. "How can I help you today?" "I would like to open a new checking and savings account," I said, placing my documents on the counter solely in my name. The process was straightforward. I filled out forms, chose a new PIN, and ordered a debit card to be sent to a post office box I had rented the week before. I deposited a modest initial sum from the joint account, an amount small enough not to trigger any automated alerts Robert might have set up. The entire transaction took 20 minutes. When I left, I had the starter checks and account information in a plain envelope. It felt like drawing a line in the sand. The next task was the joint credit cards. There were 3. I called the customer service number for each, from my cell phone in the backyard. I reported suspicious activity on the cards, small, unrecognized charges. I was calm and precise, providing details that matched the timing of some of Penelope's social media posts. The fraud departments were efficient. They canceled the existing cards immediately and issued new ones to be sent to my post office box. "Will there be a joint card holder on the new accounts?" one representative asked. "No," I said. "Please remove the joint card holder from the accounts entirely. I believe the compromise may be linked to that card holder's activities." I cited the suspicious charges again. The representative agreed, noting the accounts would be in my name only going forward. Robert's physical cards would stop working the next time he tried to use them, with no warning. The largest asset was our investment portfolio, managed through an online broker. The login credentials were saved on our shared computer, which meant the keylogger had captured them. I accessed the account from my laptop. I reviewed the holdings. A significant portion was in funds I had selected years ago, grown from my own savings and inheritance. I initiated a transfer of 50% of the total value to a new, separate account I had set up with the same broker. The system prompted for a confirmation code sent to my phone. I entered it. The transfer would take 3 to 5 business days. It was a routine reallocation, nothing that would seem alarming on a statement. The remaining balance was still substantial, more than enough to satisfy any notion of equitable division later, but the core of the wealth was now moving under my sole control. That evening, I sat at my personal laptop and began the methodical process of changing every password for every account I owned. Email, utilities, subscription services, medical portals. I used a complex password generator, creating unique strings of characters for each. I stored them in a secure, encrypted password manager. Each click of Save New Password was a lock turning, a door closing. Robert was oblivious. He came home, kissed my cheek, and complained about traffic. He used his laptop in the study, presumably checking his email, unaware that every keystroke was being recorded. He did not try to buy anything online. The financial severance was, for the moment, invisible. 2 days later, I met Gloria for a walk in the park. The air was cool. "How's the financial quarantine proceeding?" she asked, linking her arm through mine. "The patient is stable, but unaware he's been disconnected," I said. "New accounts opened, joint cards canceled, investments redirected, passwords changed." "Does he have any money of his own?" Gloria asked, a practical question. "His salary is deposited into the joint checking account," I said. "He has access to that until I drain it, but his personal savings are negligible. He always relied on the joint funds for larger expenses, and his credit cards are about to become unusable." Gloria nodded, satisfied. "He's living in your house, sleeping in your bed, and soon he won't be able to buy a cup of coffee without it declining." Poetic. "It's not poetry," I corrected her gently. "It's accounting. He's been drawing from the wrong account. I'm merely correcting the ledger." A week after my bank visit, Robert came into the kitchen while I was preparing dinner. He was frowning at his phone. "My card got declined at the gas station," he said, more puzzled than angry. "The pump said to see the attendant." "Weird. I'll have to call the bank." "Could be a skimmer on the pump," I said, not looking up from chopping vegetables. "It happens. You should call them. Better to be safe." "Yeah," he muttered, scrolling through his phone. "I'll do it later. I'll use the other card for now." I knew the other card would fail just as quietly. The third would fail after that. He would assume a systemic fraud issue, not a targeted revocation. By the time he realized it was only his access being shut down, it would be too late. The process was administrative, mundane even. There was no drama in filling out forms or talking to customer service. But with each completed task, I felt a layer of his influence over my life peel away and dissolve. I was not hiding money. I was reclaiming it. The act of moving digits from one column to another was a profound form of liberation. My financial solitude was no longer a plan. It was a fact. I updated my journal that night. Phase 2, fiscal separation, complete, assets secured, joint access terminated. Subject R remains unaware, but his operational funds are now constrained. The foundation is clear. I closed the book. The house was silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, a sound I paid for. Everything in reach was mine. The performance began in earnest once the financial groundwork was laid. I had secured my assets. Now I needed to secure the narrative, to maintain the facade of our life until the moment I chose to shatter it. It was a role, and I approached it with the discipline of an actor in a long-running play, one where only I knew the final act had been rewritten. My days fell into a meticulous pattern. In the mornings, I would work in the garden, the physical labor a useful counterpoint to the mental calculations. I weeded, pruned, and planted with focused intensity. When Robert left for work, I would wave from the porch, a smile on my face. The smile felt like a mechanical action, a lifting of specific muscles. He would blow a kiss and I would catch it, the gesture now empty of all meaning. I planned the meals he liked. That Thursday, I prepared the lemon herb chicken again, with roasted potatoes and asparagus, the kitchen filled with familiar, comforting smells. I set the table with our everyday dishes, lit a candle in the center. It was a scene of domestic contentment, a still life in which I was both the painter and a painted object. He arrived home slightly later than usual. "Something smells amazing," he called out, hanging his coat. He came into the kitchen, drawn by the aroma like a simple creature to a trap. He peered over my shoulder at the sizzling pan. "My favorite. You're spoiling me this week." "It's no trouble," I said, moving the chicken onto a platter. My voice was light, pleasant. "You've seemed a bit stressed. I thought a good meal might help." He sighed, a performative sound of weariness. "Just work. Budgets, always a headache." He poured himself a glass of wine, not offering me one. I did not drink any more in his presence. I needed my clarity untouched. We sat down to eat. The conversation was a script I knew by heart. I asked about his day. He gave vague, self-aggrandizing summaries of meetings, portraying himself as the indispensable man. I nodded, making small sounds of interest. "And how was your day?" he asked between bites. "Quiet," I said. "The garden is coming along. I saw Gloria for a walk, the usual." It was all true, and it concealed everything. "Good, good," he said, not really listening. He was distracted, his mind elsewhere. Probably on her, on Penelope from payroll. I wondered if he was thinking about the declined credit cards, but he didn't mention them again. He had likely called the bank, been told there were fraud concerns, and new cards were coming. He would be annoyed, but not suspicious. Why would he be? The fool trusted him completely. "You're quiet tonight, Evie," he observed, finally looking at me. "Just tired," I said, offering another practice smile. "Gardening takes it out of me, but it's a good tired." I took a sip of water. "How is the new marketing campaign going? The one you mentioned last week?" He brightened, launched into a detailed explanation filled with jargon. I watched his face, animated with professional passion, or perhaps just the pleasure of having an audience. I noted the slight shift in his posture, the way he gestured with his fork. I saw the man I had loved, and I saw the stranger living inside him. The psychological distance between us was now a chasm, but from across the table, it was invisible. I bridged it with questions about his work, with passing him the salt, with the simple, devastating act of normalcy. After dinner, he retreated to the living room to watch television. I cleaned the kitchen, washing each dish by hand, feeling the warm water on my skin. The domestic ritual was a meditation. Every wiped counter, every put-away plate was an affirmation that this was my domain, my routine, and soon I would be performing it solely for myself. Later, as we got ready for bed, he stood in the bathroom brushing his teeth. I was already in bed, a book open on my lap. He came out, sat on his side to remove his socks. "You know," he said, his voice slightly muffled by the toothpaste, "I was thinking maybe we should plan a trip, a cruise or something. We haven't done that in years." The irony was so thick it was almost palpable. A trip, a shared future, a use for the joint funds he could no longer access. I kept my eyes on my book. "That's a nice idea," I said, my tone neutral, non-committal. "We can talk about it when things at work calm down for you." "Yeah," he said, satisfied, climbing into bed. He turned off his lamp. "Good night, Evie." "Good night, Robert." I lay in the dark, the book closed on my chest. The performance had been flawless. He had seen only what he expected to see, his devoted, slightly tired wife, tending to her home and her husband. He had no inkling of the cold, observing intelligence that had tracked his every move, of the legal documents secured, of the financial channels quietly rerouted. His arrogance was my greatest ally. It made him blind. The tension of those days was not the tension of arguments or slammed doors. It was the silent, high-pitched tension of dramatic irony stretched taut over every mundane interaction. It was in the clink of our cutlery, in the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway, in the simple question, "How was your day?" It was a world of double meanings, where my smile was a weapon and my silence a verdict waiting to be read. I closed my eyes. The performance was exhausting but necessary. Every day I played the part, I gathered more strength, more certainty. The normalcy was a cage for him, built from his own assumptions, and I held the only key. The keylogger software quietly did its work, a silent witness in the study. I retrieved the data every few days, transferring the files to my secure laptop. For weeks, it had captured routine searches, mundane emails, online bill payments. But the night after our trip conversation, I found the first piece of gold. It was an email chain between Robert and Penelope. His password, captured effortlessly, granted me access. The subject line was innocuous, Q3 budget notes. The content was not. I read the exchanges from the bottom up. The earliest messages were professional, if overly friendly. Then they shifted. Plans for after-work drinks became plans for hotel rooms. Discussions about a bonus allocation dovetailed with discussions of a weekend getaway fund. My hands were steady on the keyboard as I scrolled. One email from him read, "Don't worry about the transfer. It's a small line item from the household account. She never looks. It's practically autopilot for her." Penelope's reply, "You're sure it's safe? I don't need drama." Him, positive. The fool trusts me completely. She's busy with her roses and her garden club. This is our future we're building, a little at a time. The phrase, written down, was a physical blow. I took a slow breath. The glass wall held. I highlighted the text, saved it as a PDF, and filed it in the digital folder I had labeled Evidence. There were more. Emails planning a future together, speculating on when he would finally be free. They mocked my hobbies, my quiet life. They discussed the money in terms of investment, in their shared comfort, in her wardrobe, in their secret happiness. The contempt was casual, offhand. It was the contempt of someone who believes their superiority is absolute and unchallenged. I printed every relevant email. The printer in my home office hummed, spitting out page after page of betrayal in crisp, black ink. I did not read them again. The information was acquired. Revisiting the emotion was inefficient. The financial trail needed professional validation. The transfers I had found were clear, but I needed an official analysis to present to Ms. Higgins and potentially to authorities. I needed a forensic accountant. I reached out to a former colleague, Martin, who had retired from a major firm but still did consulting. I called him from my cell phone in the garden. "Martin, it's Evelyn Carson. I need a discreet consultation, a personal financial matter." "Evelyn," he said, his voice warm with recognition. "Of course. What do you need?" "I have joint account statements showing regular transfers to an unknown external account over the last 8 months. I need a clean, professional report tracing those funds, confirming their source and destination pattern, a 1-page summary with your credentials on it." There was a pause. "This sounds like it might be for legal proceedings." "It is," I confirmed, "but my name is the only one on the request. This is for my personal clarity." "Understood," he said. "Email me the statements, redact anything you need to. I'll have a report for you in 48 hours. My standard rate." "Thank you, Martin." I sent the statements, highlighting the vendor transfer lines. 2 days later, his report arrived as a PDF. It was succinct. It confirmed the regularity of the transfers, the total sum, the fact that they originated from our joint checking account, which was primarily funded by my pension deposits and investment dividends. His concluding line read, "The pattern indicates a systematic diversion of funds from the joint marital account to a separate private account with no discernible familial or household purpose." It was perfect, cold, factual, and damning. I now had a complete dossier: the journal with my initial notes, the phone records with Penelope's number, the social media screenshots, Gloria's video, the deed to the house, the financial transfer records, the printed emails containing their plans and their mockery, Martin's forensic report. It was all compiled in a thick, plain white folder. I placed it in my lockbox. That evening, Robert was in a particularly good mood. He talked about a successful client presentation, about praise from his boss. He helped me clear the table after dinner, a rare gesture. "Things are really looking up, Evie," he said, smiling his charming smile. "I feel like we're turning a corner." "We certainly are," I agreed, rinsing a plate and handing it to him to dry. My tone was pleasant, neutral. "I was thinking about that trip again," he said. "Maybe the Caribbean. We could use some sun." "That would be lovely," I said. "Let's see how the next few weeks go." I did not look at him. I focused on the soapy water, on the simple task of cleaning a glass. He put a damp hand on my shoulder. "You're the best, you know that? I don't say it enough." I forced my muscles to relax under his touch. "Thank you, Robert." Later, in the quiet of my office, I took the dossier out of the lockbox once more. I laid the documents out on the desk in the order I would present them. Deed first, then financials and forensic report, then the emails, then the supporting evidence, photos, video log, phone records. It told a complete, irrefutable story of betrayal, theft, and mockery. The shift was profound. For weeks I had been gathering fragments of suspicion, building a case from shadows and anomalies. Now I held the case in my hands. It was no longer about what I feared or suspected. It was about what I could prove. The transition from investigator to executor was complete. I placed everything back into the folder. The envelope was not yet needed, but it was ready. The final piece was not more evidence, but my own resolve. Looking at the stacked papers, I felt that resolve solidify into something harder than steel, colder than ice. It was simply the truth, assembled and waiting. The next move was no longer about discovery. It was about delivery. The dossier was complete. The evidence was irrefutable. All that remained was the timing of its delivery. A strange, preternatural calm descended upon me in those final days. The anxious energy of investigation was gone, replaced by the steady certainty of execution. My actions became deliberate, ritualistic. I spent a full afternoon in my garden. It was late season, but the roses still held their color. I deadheaded the spent blooms, trimmed back the unruly branches, and watered the roots deeply. The soil was cool and dark under my gloves. This garden was my creation, a living thing I had nurtured. I looked at the house from where I knelt, the sunlight on the windows, the familiar lines of the roof. It was my house, every brick, every floorboard. I felt not loss, but a deep, protective sense of ownership. I was not preparing to leave it. I was preparing to claim it fully. The next morning, I called Gloria. "It's time," I said simply. "I'll be right over." When she arrived, we sat in the kitchen with tea. I had already packed a small wheeled suitcase. It contained a week's worth of clothes, my toiletries, my personal laptop, and the lockbox with the original documents. "I'll stay with you tomorrow night," I told her, "after the morning." Gloria nodded, her expression serious. "Is everything ready?" "Everything." I sipped my tea. "The envelope is on my desk. The bank transfers are complete. Ms. Higgins is expecting my call tomorrow afternoon. The house is mine. The money is mine. All that's left is to inform him of the new management." "He has no idea," Gloria said, a statement of fact. "None. He suggested a Caribbean trip last night." I did not smile. The irony was noted, filed away, but it did not amuse me. It was simply another data point confirming his obliviousness. "Where will he go?" she asked, a practical question. "That's not my concern," I said. "He has his salary, what's left of it. He has Penelope. They can figure it out." My voice held no malice, only finality. His future was no longer my problem to solve. After Gloria left, I went about my evening routine with Robert as if it were any other night. I made dinner, a simple pasta dish. We ate. We made inconsequential conversation about the weather, a neighbor's new car. I asked about his work. He gave vague answers. The performance was so ingrained it felt automatic. I observed him as if from a great distance, noting the casual way he reached for the salt, the sound of his chewing. I felt nothing. The connection had been severed weeks ago. Only the hollow form remained. That night, after he was asleep, I performed my final preparations. I took out a fresh tablecloth, a pale linen one we used for special occasions. I ironed it until it was crisp. In the quiet of the kitchen, I set the breakfast table for two. I placed our everyday plates, the silverware, the napkins. I set out the butter dish, the jam, 2 glasses for juice. It was a perfectly normal scene, a stage set for an ordinary morning. I stood back and looked at it. The Last Supper was over. This was the stage for the next act. I went to my office and took the thick, plain envelope from my desk. I did not open it. I knew its contents by heart. I placed it on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee machine, where it would be visible in the morning. Then I wheeled my suitcase to the front door and left it in the hall closet. I took one last walk through the quiet rooms, the living room with my mother's chair, the dining room where I had spread the financial statements, the study where the keylogger had silently witnessed his betrayal, my bedroom where he slept. I felt no nostalgia, only a quiet assessment. It was all in order. It was all mine. I slept soundly that night, a deep and dreamless sleep. When I woke, before dawn, I felt a profound clarity. There was no anger, no fear, no sadness. There was only resolve, cold and sharp as a surgical blade. I rose, showered, and dressed in a simple tailored pantsuit. I applied a minimal amount of makeup. I wanted to look like myself, only more so, poised, collected, unassailable. I went downstairs and made coffee. The familiar aroma filled the kitchen. I poured myself a cup and stood at the window, watching the sky lighten from gray to pale blue. The garden was a series of dark shapes, slowly gaining definition. It was a beautiful morning, a good morning for truth. I heard Robert's alarm sound upstairs, then the shuffle of his footsteps, the normal sounds of a normal day. I took a sip of coffee. The calm within me was absolute. The planning was over. The waiting was over. All that remained was to speak 3 words. I placed my cup on the counter next to the envelope. I waited. He came down the stairs whistling, adjusting his tie. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the table I had set. He looked chipper, well-rested, utterly unaware. "Morning, Evie," he said, heading straight for the coffee pot. He poured himself a cup. "Big presentation today. Feeling good about it?" "That's nice," I said. I remained standing near the counter, my own coffee cup in hand. He sat in his usual seat, took a sip, and glanced at the envelope beside me. "What's that, bills?" "Not exactly," I said. My voice was calm, level. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, substantial. I walked to the table and placed it directly on the linen tablecloth in front of his plate. "Open it." He looked from the envelope to my face, a faint, confused smile playing on his lips. "What is this? A surprise?" His tone was teasing, still anchored in his reality, not mine. "Open it," I repeated. I did not sit. I stood beside the table watching him. His smile faded slightly, replaced by mild curiosity. He wiped his fingers on his napkin, picked up the envelope, and tore open the flap. He pulled out the thick stack of papers. He shuffled them, his eyes scanning the top page. It was the copy of the deed, my name clearly printed as the sole owner. His brow furrowed. "What is this? Why are you showing me the deed?" "Keep reading," I said. He flipped to the next page, the forensic accountant's summary. His eyes moved quickly over Martin's credentials, the description of the transfers, the total sum. The color began to drain from his face. He turned to the next sheaf, the printed emails. I saw his eyes catch phrases. The fool trusts me completely. His own words in his own email font. He flipped faster, panic setting in. The social media screenshots of Penelope, the still frames from Gloria's video, the phone records. His hands began to shake. The papers rustled loudly in the silent kitchen. He reached the last page, a simple typed list of bullet points summarizing the evidence. He stared at it, his jaw slack. Then he looked up at me. His face was white, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible comprehension. The charming facade was gone, stripped away, leaving only stunned vacancy. "How did you—" he whispered, the words barely audible. "I trusted you," I said, my voice still even, devoid of triumph or anger. It was a simple statement of historical fact, but I also verified. He continued to stare, his mind visibly struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the architect of this dismantling. This is all— "It is all true," I finished for him. "The house is mine. The money you have been transferring is documented. Your relationship with Penelope Walsh is documented. The mockery is documented." I took a small step closer. "You will gather your personal belongings today. You will take them and you will leave. Do not use any cards. They are canceled. Do not attempt to access any accounts. The passwords are changed. Your salary will still deposit into the joint checking, which I will be closing this afternoon. What remains there after the reversal of your unauthorized transfers is yours. It is not much." He found his voice, though it was strangled. "You can't do this. We're married. This is my home." "It is my home," I corrected him, "legally and factually. You have been a guest. Your tenancy is revoked. If you are not out by 6 o'clock this evening, I will have you removed by the police. Ms. Higgins, my lawyer, has the documentation ready to file. I suggest you find alternative accommodation." I paused. "Perhaps Penelope has room." He flinched as if struck. He looked down at the damning pages in his hands, then back at me. The arrogance was completely shattered. In its place was sheer, unadorned fear. "Evelyn, please, we can talk about this. It was a mistake. She meant nothing." "You are correct," I said. "She meant nothing, and you, Robert, have shown me that you mean less." I picked up my coffee cup. "I will be at Gloria's today. A locksmith is coming at 6:15 to change all the exterior locks. I suggest you are gone before he arrives. Leave your key on the counter." I turned and walked to the sink. I rinsed my cup and placed it in the dishwasher. I could feel his eyes on my back, but I did not turn. The performance was over. There was no more role to play. I was simply myself in my kitchen, concluding a piece of business. I heard the slow, heavy sound of him pushing his chair back. He did not speak again. I heard his footsteps retreat to the stairs, then climb them, each step slow and leaden. I stood at the sink, looking out at my garden in the morning sun. The silence in the house was different now. It was no longer the silence of deception, but the silence of a space clearing, of resolution. After a time, I heard him moving about upstairs, the sounds of drawers opening and closing. I collected the envelope and its contents from the table, carefully restacking the papers. I placed them back in the folder. The evidence had served its purpose. I went to the hall closet and retrieved my suitcase. I wheeled it to the front door. I did not look back as I left. I closed the door firmly behind me, hearing the solid click of the latch. I got into my car and drove to Gloria's. I did not think about his packing, his panic, his calls to Penelope. That was his new reality to manage. Mine was waiting for me at my friend's house, and later in my own home when I returned to it alone. I stayed with Gloria for 3 days. It was a necessary buffer, a space between the life I had ended and the life I was about to begin. Gloria did not press me for details. She provided quiet companionship, strong tea, and the reliable sound of her presence in the next room. I spent those days on her sun porch, reading or simply looking out at her own, smaller garden. I felt neither euphoria nor sorrow. I felt a neutral stillness, as if I were resting after a long and arduous journey. On the morning after Robert's departure, I called Miss Higgins. "It is done. He has left. I have changed the locks. Please proceed with the divorce filing as we discussed." "Excellent," Miss Higgins said, her voice crisp with satisfaction. "I will file the petition today. Based on the documentation you provided, particularly the financial malfeasance, we will be seeking a dissolution with no spousal support. The house is not in contention. I will also be forwarding the forensic accountant's report and your statement to the district attorney's office for review regarding the misappropriated funds. That is, of course, your choice." "Proceed," I said. "I have no interest in protecting him from the consequences of his own actions." "Very well, I will handle everything. You may receive some contact from process servers or the DA's office. Refer them to me." I thanked her and hung up. The legal machinery was now in motion, efficient and impersonal. It was a relief to have it in her capable hands. On the fourth day, I returned home. Gloria drove me. We pulled into the driveway and I sat for a moment looking at the house. It looked the same. The roses, the white siding, the green shutters. But it felt different. It felt like mine in a way it never had before, because now that ownership was unchallenged and absolute. The new lock on the front door accepted my key with a smooth click. I pushed the door open. The air inside was still, slightly stale from being closed up. There was no other presence. I stepped inside. Gloria followed, carrying my suitcase. "Do you want me to stay for a while?" "No," I said, placing my purse on the console table. "I need to be here alone, but thank you for everything." She hugged me, a firm, quick embrace. "Call me later, for tea." "I will." After she left, I performed a slow walkthrough. The house was clean, orderly. He had taken his clothes, his toiletries, a few framed photos of himself. He had left behind the furniture, the dishes, the life we had built together. His absence was not a gaping hole. It was the removal of a foreign object. The spaces felt lighter, clearer. I opened all the windows. The fresh autumn air swept through, carrying away the last stagnant breath of the past. I put on some soft music, something instrumental. I began to clean. Not a frantic cleansing, but a methodical, room-by-room reclamation. I washed the linen tablecloth from our last breakfast. I vacuumed the carpets. I wiped down every surface. It was not about erasing him. It was about establishing my own order. The next weeks passed with a quiet rhythm. Ms. Higgins's office sent updates. The divorce petition was served. Robert, through a harried-looking attorney, made a feeble attempt to contest the terms, but upon receiving a copy of the dossier and a letter from Ms. Higgins outlining the potential embezzlement case, he capitulated. The proceedings were swift. The decree would be final in a matter of months, with no financial ties remaining. I heard through the faint rustle of the neighborhood grapevine that he had moved into a small apartment. Penelope's social media went private, then inactive. I did not inquire further. Their story was no longer any concern of mine. My days found their own pattern. Mornings in the garden, afternoons spent reading or managing my investments, or having coffee with Gloria. I took a pottery class at the community center. I joined a book club. These were not attempts to fill time, but explorations of interests I had long set aside. One sunny afternoon, a month after the envelope, Gloria came over. We sat in the garden at the small wrought iron table. The roses were past their peak, but the late-blooming asters were a vibrant purple. I poured tea for both of us. "You look well," Gloria said, stirring a spoonful of honey into her cup. "You look settled." "I am settled," I said. It was true. The cold, calculating focus had ebbed away, its work done. What remained was a deep and solid peace. The anger had been converted into energy, and that energy had been spent. The sadness had been acknowledged, then filed away as part of the historical record of my life. It no longer had power over my present. Do you ever think about him?" Gloria asked, her tone not probing but conversational. "I think about the facts of what happened," I said. "I think about the mechanisms of betrayal and the strategies of recovery. I do not think about him, not in a personal way. He has become an abstract figure, a lesson learned." Gloria nodded, understanding. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the bees and the flowers and the distant sound of a lawnmower. After she left, I remained in the garden. The light was softening into late afternoon gold. I finished my tea. I felt the sun warm on my skin, the solidity of the chair beneath me, the quiet ownership of the space around me. I was alone, but I was not lonely. The loneliness had been in the marriage, in the space between his performance and my unseen self. Now there was no gap. There was. I was complete within myself. The house was silent, but it was a peaceful silence filled with my own potential. I looked at my hands, resting on the table. They were the hands that had planted this garden, that had written the journal, that had placed the envelope on the table. They were capable hands. I smiled then, not a performance for anyone, but a simple, unfettered reflex of contentment. It was a small smile, one that reached my eyes and warmed my face. It felt real. It felt earned. The revenge was not in his suffering, which I did not witness and did not seek. The revenge was in this moment, in the quiet of my garden, in the teacup in my hand, in the unshakable knowledge that I had taken the shattered pieces of my trust and with patience and precision had rebuilt something stronger. I had verified the worst, and in doing so I had discovered my own best. The audit was closed. The ledger was balanced. My life was my own.